Welcome back. All right, so last night, Sidney Crosby reaches rarefied air 1,000 assists. So I wanted to look through that 1,000 assist club because it's pretty exclusive. And when we look at NHLers who are approaching it, there's nobody who's going to reach 1,000 assists soon in the National Hockey League. So the leader in all time points is obviously Gretzky, all time assists as well, all time goals, everything. The goals that eventually is going to get passed by Ovechkin in all likelihood. However, the assists and the points probably pretty safe. He played 1,487 games, 894 goals, 1,963 assists, 2,857 points. So yes, in my eyes, best player who ever played. Ron Francis is number 2 all time on the assist list. Ron Francis was a great captain. He was a great player, great passer, and pretty good goal scorer too. In 1,731 games, 549 goals, 1,249 assists, 1,798 points. And it should go without saying, but I'll throw this in here. Anybody with 1,000 assists obviously ends up in the Hall of Fame. Mark Messier, 1,756 games played, 694 goals, 1,193 assists, 1,887 points. It was interesting when Messier retired because there was some debate about whether or not he might come back for one more year to break Gordie Howe's record in games played. When he opted not to, he actually called Gordie and said that record's safe. I'm not going to keep playing. He also was just short of 700 goals, just short of 1,900 points, and just short of 1,200 assists. So there were reasons why people felt like Messier might have tried one more go, but he didn't. Ray Bourque, 1,612 games, 410 goals, 1,169 assists, 1,579 points. So in the top 4, you've got, as I said, Gretzky, I would argue, greatest of all time. Francis, one of the best combination of leaders, passers, just skill, everything was there. Messier, one of the best leaders in the game. And yes, I know with Vancouver it didn't work, but it worked everywhere else that he played. Messier, great goal scorer, one of the first known as a power forward in the National Hockey League. Ray Bourque, arguably one of the best defensemen in the history of the game, had the offense, had the defense, won himself a share of Norris trophies. And then you get to Jagr, who was, he's still playing, so was seems weird to say, but he played 1,733 games, 766 goals, 1,155 assists, 1,921 points. And I've never seen that he's officially retired from the NHL. So Jagr, also one of the best of all time. It was seen that in terms of scoring, it was going to go Gretzky, Lemieux, and then Jagr. And it did for a while. Jagr wasn't quite at the top as long as some of the others, but Jagr, one of the best point producers in the history of the game. Paul Coffey, arguably the best offensive defenseman. When we talk about creating a defensive defenseman award, it's always Langley that gets brought up. When we talk about an offensive defenseman award, it's often Paul Coffey that gets brought up. Played 1,409 games in his career, 396 goals, so just short of 400, 1,135 assists, 1,531 points. And again, these numbers are great for a defenseman. Yes, the argument's been made, I've made it myself, that he was kind of a rover out there. He kind of played forward / defenseman. Kevin Lowe had to cover a lot, but still, Coffey, one of the best point producers of all time, yes. Joe Thornton, 1,714 games, 430 goals, 1,109 assists, 1,539 points overall. For Thornton, so you'll notice that this is just descending by assists because that's what we're focusing on. Thornton, one of the best players to not win a Stanley Cup in his career. Arguably one of the best that never won that trophy. And it's too bad because Thornton, during his best days in San Jose, was an intimidating figure out there. Adam Oats, one of my all-time favorites, 1,337 games in his career, 341 goals. He would have scored a lot more, but he was not selfish. 1,079 assists, 1,420 points. One of the best pure passers I ever saw, but yeah, when he decided, I'll shoot the puck myself, he was still pretty darn good. Steve Eiserman, 1,514 games played, 692 goals, 1,063 assists, 1,755 points. Because he played in the 80s, because he played in the same era as Gretzky and Lemieux, there were times that Eiserman, I don't think, got as much respect as he should have because there were so many players scoring a lot of points. But Eiserman, once the points actually dropped a bit, he became a better player, and Stanley Cup started rolling into Detroit. Not a coincidence. Gordie Howe, also a Detroit great, 1,767 games in his career, 801 goals, 1,049 assists, 1,850 points. And when he retired, he was the career high leader across the board, goals, assists, and points. It wouldn't stay that way, of course. We got into the live puck era. You can only imagine if Gordie Howe had played in the 80s instead of the 50s, but it is what it is. Gordie Howe, one of the best players ever to play, and known for throwing an elbow here and there. And I think if Gordie Howe had played now, I think there would have been a lot of, Howe's a talented player, but man, is he a dirty player. I think there would have been a lot of those comments. Marcel Dionne, 1,348 games for him in his career, 731 goals, 1,040 assists, 1,771 points. And I mentioned it with Eiserman, I'll mention it with Dionne as well. Overshadowed in his time. Great player. Sadly, played for an LA Kings team that usually while he was there, they were pretty mediocre. Ends up without a Stanley Cup himself, so it's an absolute shame. Dionne was a lot of fun to watch, though. Mario Lemieux, the only one on the board with 1,000 assists that didn't play 1,000 games. 915 games, 690 goals, 1,033 assists, 1,723 points. If not for injuries, if not for his brief retirement as well, because he'd had enough of all the clutching and grabbing, he wasn't having fun playing the game anymore. If not for those two things, I think he would have threatened Gretzky's records, especially the goals. He easily would have had, I think, another 300 goals in his career. He might end up with 1,000. Mario Lemieux, Gretzky was the great one. Lemieux was the magnificent one. And then they called Lindros the next one, which I never liked that they called him the next one. But yeah, Lemieux, absolutely one of the best all-around players, leaders, intimidating figures in the history of the game, who sadly, because he played in an era where they let a lot of stuff go, the slashes, the amount of cross checks, just the amount of punishment his body took. Absolute shame. If he had played in this era where there isn't as much of that allowed, again, ridiculous amount of points. Sakic, 1,378 games played, 625 goals, 1,016 assists, 1,641 points. For Joe Sakic, one of the all-time greats as well, absolutely. Stanley Cups with Colorado, yes. And one of the all-time great Nordiques before the move to Colorado as well. Which brings us to Sidney Crosby. So again, he has joined a list of ridiculously talented players. And again, we can quibble over who the best of all the best are, but really, this is just ridiculous territory. 1,269 games played by Crosby, 591 goals, so he's on the verge of 600 there. 1,000 assists for 1,591 points. Crosby, I think, has a realistic chance at reaching 2,000 points in his career. Yep. Could he get 409 more points before he retires? Yeah, I think he can. The question really becomes one of, and this has been the question mark with Ovechkin as well, whether or not as he gets older we're going to see that production drop off. In Crosby's case, we haven't. He's not producing like he did his first few years in the NHL, but that's just kind of an outlier at this point. He's still always around a point per game, and if you think to yourself, well, he should play about 4 or 5 more seasons, then yeah, that 2,000 point mark, he could. It's possible. I'm not saying he will, but he at the very least with 1,591 points could end up in the 1,800 point range, sure. And then with that 1,000 assists, I could see him ending up, about 1,150, 1,200, somewhere in that region. So Crosby's story's nowhere near done. And then the question becomes one of where will he be recognized at the end? Because you get into that Mount Rushmore discussion of who would be on their Mount Rushmore of all-time greats in the game. And it's hard because comparing across eras is difficult. Even going through this list, you can see where I'm saying, well, if this guy had played during this era, it might add more points, might add less points in this era. So Crosby has played through what was a dead puck era for a lot of his career, and now he's played through pretty lively puck era as well, which is referring to the scoring levels. And so, yeah, I don't see any reason why he can't, say, have 80 points a season for 5 more years. Why not? Why can't he? He's already set records. He's already shown that the aging process does not concern him, so it's possible. Now, when we look at active NHLers, Patrick Kane's the next one on the list, 1,227 games, 471 goals, 810 assists, 1,281 points. I don't think we're going to see Patrick Kane hit 1,000 assists. 190 more assists. I think is probably going to be a little bit more than what his body's going to allow. He has shown a lot with Detroit this year, but I don't know how many more years he has left. I don't think Malkin gets there either, although it's possible. 1,142 points for Malkin. 496 goals, so he's right on the verge of 500. 796 assists, 1,292 points. So he's almost at 1,300 points, almost at 800 assists, and almost at 500 goals. Again, ridiculous amount of guys that seem to all be hitting milestones this year. And Malkin, it'll be early next year. He's going to start, pegging all these off. Kopitar's next on the list, 1,371 games, 419 goals, 792 assists, 1,211 points. I don't know if Kopitar's going to play long enough either to get to 1,000 assists. So for the next three on the list, I don't know that they're going to end up joining that 1,000 assist club. I think we have to look at the younger players where we got a couple that could. First off, you've got McDavid, 643 games, 334 goals, 646 assists, 980 points. That's right. McDavid has more than an assist per game in his career right now. Those numbers are insane. He's going to reach the 1,000 point club early next season. Absolutely crazy numbers. So McDavid at some point is going to end up in the 1,000 assist list. And then we can have the discussion about where McDavid is in the all-time grand scheme of things as well, which we are already. Marner, 573 games, 193 goals, 442 assists, 635 points. Just in terms of assists per game, Marner is, again, is it likely he's going to play 1,300 plus games? He could. There's a lot of guys on this board that reach 13, 14, 1,500 games and end up with over 1,000 assists. If Marner has a career that long, I think 1,000 assists are within reach, but it's going to depend on where he plays with who and all that fun stuff. But Marner is a pretty fantastic passing forward. He's a good goal scorer too, but the 193 goals in 573 games tell you he'd prefer to pass the puck. And I think Auston Matthews has appreciated it through much of his career. Not that Matthews needs Marner for points or Marner needs Matthews for points. They're gifted and talented forwards as it is. But there you go. So, in terms of all-time, setup men, I think Crosby's going to end up, he's 16 behind Sakic. That'll be passable early in the next season, I would think. I would think before his career's done, he could be maybe third on the list, being another 200 assists. But again, as I said, I could see him getting 400 points, so that'd be at least 200 assists. We'll see. So how high on the list do you think Crosby's going to be when he does retire? And we can have the debate about who the greatest of all time is and where Crosby fits on the list, but again, that all ends up in debate, and it's opinion. It's opinion, so there is no right or wrong answer. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.